All right, hello and welcome to my oral presentation on Are Violent Video Games a Problem? And I know what you're thinking, this is a topic that has been discussed so many times, especially in the news, and I know that you probably have your own personal opinions on it, but as a gamer myself, I wanted to take a dive into the research and actually discover, are violent video games a problem? Now, after doing all the research and writing my literature review, I split up the final paper into three separate subtopics. So the first subtopic focused on violent video games and behavior. Second one focused on violent video games and real world violence. And then the third one focused on youth and violent video games. Now, I'll give the general summary at the end, but for right now, I wanted to get some of the key points that I discovered through my research. So I pulled one study from each of the subtopics, and for violent video games and behavior, the study I looked at was from Tobias Gretemeyer and Neil McClatchy. And their research question was basically asking, do violent video games cause dehumanization? And if you don't know what dehumanization is, let's say you pop in a Call of Duty game for the first time and you shoot someone and they're dead. Are you going to feel bad for that person, or are you going to go and continue playing the game? Well, chances are you're probably going to keep playing the game. You're going to kill a lot more people, maybe in barbaric ways. And that's dehumanization, is when we get used to performing grisly violence and seeing it. So that's what dehumanization is. But with dehumanization, when gamers get that, is there an increase in aggressive behavior because of that dehumanization? Well, in order to determine whether that research question was true or false, the researchers performed two experiments at the University of Sussex, where they gathered students for both experiments. And for experiment number one, they focused on the dehumanization factor. So they have one group of kids play Tetris, which is a non-violent game. That was the neutral group. And then another group of students played Lamers, which is the violent game. And for experiment number two, that focused on the attitudes of gamers. So that was the aggressive part of the experiment, of the general study, while experiment one was more focused on gamers and dehumanization. And their findings, not surprisingly, was yes, violent video games do cause dehumanization. That is clearly evident in our society today, because there are millions of players playing games like Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto. Everyone's become used to killing, and it's not only video games, but you have movies too that cause dehumanization. But for the aggressive behavior portion, they said it is possible that dehumanization does increase aggressive behavior, but more research is needed to determine if that's true or false. Now, for violent video games and real world violence, I looked at a CNN article from Susan Scuddy, who asked, do violent video games, lead to violence in the real world? And in order to prove, whether that question was right or wrong, Scuddy looked at the works of Christopher Ferguson, who is a psychologist that has written a lot of articles on violent video games. But Scuddy also looks at the American Academy of Pediatrics. And in the findings, Scuddy found out that the American Academy of Pediatrics summarized from over 400 studies that, yes, there is a link between violent media and hostile behavior and angry feelings, etc. So that's more for the argument that, yes, violent video games are a problem because it's causing hostile behavior. However, Scuddy finds a different argument from Christopher Ferguson, saying that violent games aren't the cause of violence in the real world, and they actually decrease bad behavior because especially young people become preoccupied with playing violent games. Now, let's say, for example, Red Dead Redemption 3 comes out, which hopefully that happens. Young people will be more preoccupied playing that game because they've been looking forward to it than going out and robbing a 7-Eleven. Now, that can still happen, but for the vast majority of people, they're going to be inside playing the new game until it's done and then probably replay it again. Now, speaking more of youth and violent video games, this was another study done by Greg Topo, and the research question was, do violent video games cause violence? And if not, what other subtle effects are there from playing violent games? Now, the methods were Topo looked at a lot of research, and specifically, Topo focused on a study done by Douglas A. Gentile, who is a psychologist at Iowa State University, who did a study with his dad, J. Ronald Gentile, about violent video games. And for the findings, Topo said that youth criminals decreased between the years 1994 and 2010. And essentially, Topo is trying to explain that if violent video games were increasing violence, there would be a lot more violence in 2010. Because back in like 94, you didn't have a lot of really bad violent games. You had Tomb Raider, which isn't that violent. It's not that bloody. Then you skip ahead to 2010, you have Call of Duty Black Ops, you have Grand Theft Auto, you have all these different, more violent games. So if violent games were causing violence, there would have been an increase, but there was actually a decrease. However, Topo points out the Gentile study, and essentially Gentile and his father figured out that it was likely for kids and teens to have increased aggressive behavior when they were playing more games. And the researchers also discovered that violent video games can be looked at as role models for hostile behavior, showing the kids, oh, this is how you fight and things like that. So for overall conclusions, those were just three separate studies, but I think that they were probably the best ones that I looked at because it was evenly balanced about the issue of violent video games, which I would have to sum up is the case. There are positives for violent video games that show that they aren't a problem in our society, but there are also negatives to violent games that show that they are a problem. For the increase, or the positive side of violent games, they can be responsible for maybe decreasing youth criminal activity. For another study I looked at, they increase social bonding skills because games are played in an online format a lot these days, so it can increase social bonding between friends and family. And for negativity, it can increase aggressive behavior and it can cause dehumanization. So it's equal. It's kind of a mixed bag. So that's what I found out about my topic. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.